This is Mel Thompson, and this is a podcast and a series of podcasts about political risk. Today I'll be discussing Ethiopia. Ethiopia 30 years ago was a country very close to total collapse. It was engaged in a horrible famine, and it also had very few economic prospects to speak of. Now, 30 years later, in 2015, it is a success story, and a success story that was built upon the concept of investment in infrastructure projects. The government of Ethiopia has borrowed heavily from its banks and taken some foreign funding and created infrastructure projects that have, of course, created construction jobs and jobs related to them in the supply chains. Now, you also need to look at the jobs and opportunities created from new infrastructure projects that reach out into remote areas that were previously thought not the best place in the world for foreign direct investment or business to begin. Also, the people in certain areas that had a very limited ability to get into more urban and suburban areas where there were jobs previously now have those opportunities available thanks to these infrastructure projects. Of course, there are many political risks that are associated with projects like this, and the number one political risk that I see in Ethiopia is a lack of democracy and expropriation of property and land in certain areas that has caused a certain degree of civil unrest. People are not happy with the way the government has conducted itself when it comes to taking land or moving them due to new infrastructure projects. And of course, this type of problem can create civil unrest. Civil unrest can also manifest itself in a slowdown of work by a workforce and also protests that may be peaceful or they may not be peaceful. A lack of democracy in a country like Ethiopia needs to be viewed as a political risk. It cannot be put in the same context and understanding that we would have as democracy is established here in the United States, but it should be looked at as a political risk from the standpoint of whether or not the people are happy with the way the government is treating them in certain situations. Getting involved with their internal politics is not something that a foreign direct investor or a company should do, but an understanding of the situation, the lay of the land, if you will, is very important. If you understand that, you can avoid a political risk by being prepared for it. And in this case, a civil disruption of supply chains, work stoppages or slowdowns, or general protests that possibly could be peaceful or destructive if they start destroying brick and mortar establishments or harming in other ways other infrastructure. These types of things could be a true problem for foreign direct investors and companies. They need to be understood, considered, and planned for as a true political risk. But overall, Ethiopia, at this very juncture, is a true success story because of these infrastructure projects. And anytime you see governments involved in these types of projects, as far as creating the basic form of jobs that are then filled by people, companies, and investors through the hiring of people who did not have opportunities previously. Once you see a government create the environment for these types of projects, you also have to consider the fact that that government could have other problems because of its very nature as a government that may hinder or adversely impact these projects in the future. And in Ethiopia, that particular situation is a lack of democracy as we would understand or accept it here in the States. This has been Mel Thompson.